right, let's do this. Go ahead and turn in your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And as we're doing this, I just want to say, again, I'm so excited. The series on marriage has been really great. We've been in this series on marriage. It's called I Do. We've been walking through kind of these. First week we talked about marriage needs some assembly required. We always need to work on some things. We need to put things together. We need to work on that. Some assembly required. We talked about those three things. First of all was focus on the Father. We're going to foster some fun, and we need to fuel the flame. We need to be intentional with our marriages and how we grow and how we make that work. Last week we talked about communication. Communication is huge, and we talked about the book of James, James chapter 1, and we said this over and over again. Everyone needs to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Man, if we get those three things right in our communication, marriage goes so much better, and that's how God designed it for it too. So today we're going to talk about the key to staying in love. And I know you guys know the statistics that divorce is very prevalent in our culture today. I know that it's experienced. I'm sure all of us in this room either know someone or have a family member who have experienced divorce. Actually, this year, of the couples who are going to get married this year, 6 out of 10 of those couples, their marriage is going to end in divorce. And most of those within the first 7 years of marriage. And that's just crazy to me. And I just think about that, like, if that were the success rate of cars, okay, we would stop driving cars, right? Like if 6 out of 10 cars failed in 7 years, we'd stop doing that. But there's something about marriage, and even in our culture where we're at today, we are always drawn to this idea that two people can fall in love and stay in love together forever. And it's just like, what is that? What makes that work? You know, the other thing that I would say about marriage too is we all know people who have been married, and maybe they're still married, maybe they've been married for decades, and they hate each other. Like, they don't even want to be in the same room together. They argue with each other. Like, maybe they stay together for the kids. Maybe they stay together for financial reasons. Maybe they stay together for, social reasons, whatever it is. But they're just not, they don't love each other. They don't care about each other. And like, why is that? What is that going? Well, we're going to talk about that in 1 Corinthians 13. You maybe heard that before. It's called the love chapter. And it's read at many weddings. It was read at our wedding. You guys have probably heard that before. We're going to kind of unpack that. But before we do that, I want to set you up for something. There's a movie. I don't know if you guys have seen this movie. This movie, it's called Juno. And this movie, Juno, it was about 10 years ago. It came out. And it's a story, if you haven't seen it, it's a story of a little girl, high school girl actually, who becomes pregnant. And she makes the brave decision that she's actually going to go ahead and she's going to have the child. And she's going to have the child, but instead of keeping it, she's actually going to give it up for adoption. So she's going to find a family that would need a baby to bless, and she was going to do that. It's a really cool story. And so she finds what she thinks is the perfect couple. And she says, this couple is great, and I'm going to give them my baby. So the rest of the movie is kind of the story of her pregnancy, her journey through that, and their journey through adopting this child. It's a beautiful story. Well, she finds out that at one point, there's no such thing as the perfect couple. And this couple that she thought was the perfect couple, they have some issues, they have some problems. And so she reaches this point where it's kind of a breaking point for her, and it's kind of the pinnacle of the movie. And then she has this really, really tender conversation with her dad. They're sitting in the kitchen, and her dad can tell her something wrong. Her dad's like, what's going on, honey? What's going on? And she kind of shares a little bit about what's going on with them. And then she makes this statement. She asks this question, and I just absolutely love this question that she asked. She said, I just need to know that it's possible for two people to stay happy together forever. I just want to know that it's possible for two people to stay happy together forever. And I think that's the question we're asking, even in society today. Like, even though we know the statistics, we know what's going on, this world has that hunger, has that desire to, like, what is that we're drawn together? And I believe that's the thumbprint of God in our hearts. I believe that God has designed us to be in that relationship. Remember the Garden of Eden we talked about in week 1? That was before sin happened. Like, this is God's perfect plan for us. And we still have that inside of us. But if we do it outside of what God's Word says, we're going to have trouble. We're going to have struggles with that. So we're going to take a look at 1 Corinthians 13. I'm back there now, and we're going to talk about what Paul says. Now, Paul is the guy who wrote Corinthians. He was a church planter. Sometimes we call the Apostle Paul. He went around the first century and started all these churches in these different communities. There was a church named Corinth, and that's where he wrote this letter to his church in Corinth that he helped plant. And it was the first one. He wrote a second one, so that's 1 and 2 Corinthians. So I'm going to go ahead and read. I'm in chapter 13, verse 1. It says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I am a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Okay, what's that mean? It's saying, if I have the way to articulate things in such a way that you can grasp them, that you can understand them, but I don't have love. There's that phrase, have love, I'm nothing. I'm just like a cymbal, I'm like a gong, I'm just making noise. If I have the gift of prophecy and I can fathom all mysteries and knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but I do not have love, there it is again, have love, I am nothing. Knowledge is great. Knowledge is a great thing to get, but even if you know everything and you can understand everything and you don't have love, it doesn't mean anything. If I give all I possess to the poor, I give my body to the hardships that I may boast, but I do not have love, there it is again, I gain nothing. If I don't have love, I gain nothing. Paul is writing this to a group of people who, before they started following Jesus Christ, they were pagan worshipers. And what they did is they followed the Greek gods. And you guys maybe studied Greek mythology, you understand that the gods of the Greek mythology, they didn't really like people that much. And they would kind of play with people. They would toy with their emotions. And so it was the people's job to try to please the gods. Like they always had to do things. They had to do these sacrifices and all these weird rituals because they wanted to please the god. So as Paul's writing this to this group of people, what he's saying is this God that we're talking about is different, okay? It's not your job to have to please this God. This God loves you. He's in love with you. He wants, his desires to have a relationship with you. So he wants to have that relationship. So as he goes through this, in the next part, he's going to kind of specifically nail down some things, some characteristics of this love that this God has for us and that we can have for each other. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. As I'm going to go through this, and there's all of this stuff in here I agree with. I'm like, yep, that's right. There's one phrase in here, and I'll get to it when we get to that part. There's one phrase in here that when I first heard it, I'm like, I don't know if that's true. And I really kind of struggled with it. Actually, I kind of wrestled with it. And what I'm going to be sharing with you, actually, I first heard this about 8 years ago. There's a pastor by the name of Andy Stanley. I don't know if you guys know Andy Stanley or not, but I love listening to him. He's a great communicator. And I actually first heard this from him. And when I first heard it, I said that. I was like, I don't know if I believe that. So as you're listening to us, as we go through this, if you feel a little pushback in your heart, I want you to know that's okay, because I felt that way too. But the reason why we're talking about this today, the reason why I feel it's so important, is because I didn't necessarily understand it, or maybe even, I don't know if agree is the wrong word, but what I started doing is I started living it out in my life. And I'm telling you, of all the things that I've done in my marriage, and not only in my marriage, in other relationships, this one thing, doing this one thing, has made all the difference in the world. And I think it's really the key. So we're going to go through that, and I'll tell you what it is, but I want to set you up for this. So we're in verse 4. Okay? What is love? Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrong. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Okay, so all of that sounds really good. And I get to verse 7, and this is where I struggle. Okay, and this is the part where I went, geez, I don't know about that. And it's that one part where it says, always trust. Always trust. Some translations actually say, believes all things. Always trust. Always believes everything. So I thought about that. I'm like, I don't know if that's true. Like, is that really true? Because that would mean that love is kind of blind. Like, what does that look like? What does that mean? Well, here's what I'm going to say. This one is, the reason why this is difficult is because it doesn't necessarily depend on me. Trust always depends on the other person, right? The other person, I have to put my trust in the other person, and I don't know if you guys know this, other people have a tendency to let us down when we put our trust in them, right? So what does that look like? What does that mean? Well, I'm going to tell you, this is the key to staying in love. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So, every time, in every single relationship we have expectations. Okay? We have an expectation. Okay? And a lot of times, there's a gap between what we expect, what our expectations are, and what our experience is. And if you got your notes, that's what those blanks are in there. Sometimes there's a gap between what we expect and what our experience is. I'll give you an example. He told me he would be here at 5 o'clock, It's now 5:15, I haven't got a text, I haven't heard anything from him, okay? There's a gap between what's expected and what I'm experiencing, okay? We agreed we were going to spend this much money this month, and it's already the 4th of the month, and she's already spent this much money. Okay, you guys know where I'm going with this. Okay, there's always that gap between what we expect and what we experience. Now, this is the part that I don't want you to miss, and this is the key to this. I think this is so important. What you put in that gap, between what you expect and what you experience, can make all the difference in the relationship and in your life. So, you have two choices, basically. When there's a gap between what you expect and what you experience, you can believe the best. You can believe the best, or you can assume the worst. Okay? And all of us do this. Whenever there's a gap, we can always believe the best. Oh, you know, he's late. I'm sure maybe something came up. Maybe they had car trouble. Maybe something got delayed. Or we can assume the worst. He's always late. He's never on time. He's always saying these things, and now he's late again. Here it is again. Assuming the worst. You know, believe the best. Oh, she overspent money against me. Well, maybe there's something going on. Maybe something need that we didn't think of. We didn't come up. Assume the worst. She's never been good with money. Her mom wasn't good with money. Her sister's not good with money. She's going to break us. Always assume the worst. So we can either believe the best or we can assume the worst. And this is what I'm going to tell you. Every single time we do this, every single time there's a gap between what we expect and what we experience, what we choose to believe, where we fall on that, is going to make all the difference in our love relationships. So, Marcus Buckingham wrote a book called The One Thing You Need to Know. This is not a religious book. This isn't even a book on marriage. But he did a study. He referenced a study in this book, and it's so fascinating. There's over 105 couples. And the average length of the relationship was 10 years. So there's a cross-section, but the average length is 10 years. These are not just newlywed couples. These are people who have been together for a long time that would claim that their relationship, they're happy in their relationship. Like they're very happy in their relationship. Okay? So what they did is they gave them a list of qualities to rate their spouse on. Okay? So I would rate Elaine, Elaine would rate me. So they had an assumption, as all scientists do when they do experiments. They had an assumption. They said that over time, the reason why people are happy and they want to stay together and they're still happy together is because what they've done is they've actually lowered their expectations. You know, they realize there's going to be gaps in expectations. They say, well, you know, he's not sure that happened, but, you know, that's just kind of who he is, and I've just kind of learned to accept it, and those types of things that they've lowered. That was their assumption, that they actually lowered their expectation to meet more of their experience. What they found, and this is what was fascinating about that, they actually found the exact opposite was true. And what I mean by that is every single couple rated their spouse higher than the spouse rated themselves. Actually rated them higher than the spouse rated themselves. And at first they're like, well, that can't be right. So they actually took these same couples and they followed them through for several more years. What they found that this gap actually increased. It didn't decrease, it actually increased. And so this was fascinating to them. And this is what it said. They basically had an unrealistic positive view of the person they were with. Like, what does that mean? So they talked about this phenomenon, and this has been repeated in study after study over and over again, that this phenomenon is that they chose to believe the best. When there was a gap, they always believed the best, and they rated their spouse higher than what they actually were. They actually called it an upward spiral of love. Like, what is an upward spiral of love? Okay, basically what they said is that choice to believe the best led to a conviction. The conviction was that I'm going to always believe that my partner, I'm going to believe the best about my partner. I'm going to have that thought. I'm going to believe the best about my partner. That conviction led to a sense of security in the partner. Just think about that. You didn't have to sit on pins and needles. You didn't have to always try to come up with an excuse or rationalize or justify. You actually are secure in your relationship. And that security led to a high level of trust. Okay? A high level of trust that can only be gained over time and with exception. And what that did, that high level of trust led to a word. And this is a word that our culture has just warped. And I hate that, and I want to take this word back. And the word is intimacy. It led to a high level of intimacy. When we think of intimacy, a lot of times we think about it in the sexual way. Okay? This intimacy that they're talking about, and I love this definition, it's called a fearless reveal. Okay, I love that, fearless reveal. I can be, and you can think about it, I can be completely naked, or you can think about it, I can be just completely vulnerable. I can be completely open to this person, and I know that they're going to protect me, and they're going to have my best interest in mind. And that's that upward spiral of love. And I go back, when I hear that, I go back to 1 John 4:18. And 1 John 4:18 says, there's no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. That perfect love is that decision, that choice, that I'm going to believe the best, actually creates an environment that we can have intimacy with you. And so their recommendation, just to come back to that study real quick, this is what their recommendation was, and I absolutely love this. In a relationship, find the most generous explanation for each other's behaviors, and then believe it. Believe the best in their explanation. To which I say, ruby red slippers, right? Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz? You've had the secret the whole time. It's been right here in God's Word. The Apostle Paul said the same thing back 2,000 years ago. You know, tap your heels together and you'll be back home. I just love it when God's Word is affirmed by science. So, now, I understand there might be some pushback to this. And I get it, because like I said, I was there. Because there's two main obstacles that we run into in this, okay? And I'm 40 years old. I don't have a lot of life experience, but I've had enough life experience now to understand that there are some times where like, okay, talk to me more about this. What does this believe about? So there's two kind of obstacles that we're going to kind of walk through here. Now the first one is what we experience can be an obstacle to that, okay? What we experience can be an obstacle. Like they do it again. I had somebody ask me one time, okay, Jeff, that's great. So does that mean that I just stick my head in the sand? I don't have any conversations with him. I just let him walk over me. I'll be a doormat. And this is my response to that question. Absolutely not. Because I wanna believe the best. I always want to believe the best in Elaine. I always want to believe the best. So when there's a gap between that, what this is saying is before I get to that point, I'm not going to assume the worst. I'm going to start with believing the best. In my mind, I'm going to make a conscious choice that when there's a gap, I'm going to start with believing the best. But it's going to compel me that I'm going to have a conversation with her. I'm going to have to say, okay, hey, tell me about that. But I'm not going to go into it with a sarcastic or snarky attitude about it. That's where the difference is. I'm going to go into it with a neutral basis of saying, hey, I really want to find out what happened here. Because as we talked about in week 1, our feelings aren't good or bad. They're just feelings, right? What you did made me feel this way. Now, a lot of times, especially in my case, I don't even know that I'm doing it. So I appreciate that. A lot of times I don't know what I'm doing that's bothering her, so I need to hear that. So of course, absolutely, we need to have that conversation. But every single time there's that gap, we always have that choice. I make that decision. I can choose to believe the best, or I can choose to assume the worst. The second obstacle that we have, and I think we focus a lot on number 1, like our experience, but the second obstacle is who we are. Who we are. Every single one of us, whether we care to admit it or not, brings our own past and our own experiences into every single relationship, including marriage. Now, a lot of us today, and I'm one of this as well, a lot of times when I started my relationship with Elaine, she wasn't my first relationship. I had previous relationships before Elaine. Now, that's one of the problems that we have, is because we take those relationships, those baggage that we had, you know, if there was problems, if there was heartaches, if there was infidelity in these previous relationships, we bring that into the relationship with us, and we have to recognize that. And even if you haven't had previous relationships, even if this is the first person that you've ever been with together in a marriage or whatever, that kind of relationship, we all have our baggage that we bring into it. We all have our relationship with our parents that we bring into that, or relationships with others, past hurts. And here's the thing I want to say. There are certain behaviors that will trigger responses in us that will remind us about our previous experiences. I'll give you an example. If you're in a relationship with someone and you have been in a previous relationship and experienced infidelity, there are certain things that they're going to say or certain things they're going to do that are going to trigger that jealousy or that concern that infidelity might happen again. You might not even be aware that happens, but that does happen. And that's why I'm such a big fan of marriage counseling. I think everyone needs to, at some point in their marriage, go through, because you can't see that stuff in a mirror. And a lot of times your spouse or your partner isn't able to explain that either because they can't tell either. They're trying to figure you out. So who we are can make that decision. I'm going to say this about suspicion. Suspicion can sometimes be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is what I mean by that. If you're always going to assume the worst in your relationship, if you're always going to say, you basically have to prove it to me that you're right, what that does in your partner, your spouse, that creates a sense of suspicion where it's like, there must be something wrong. I always have to try to be measuring up to something that I can't ever do. So we talked about the upward spiral of love. I want to talk to you quick about what's the downward spiral. Is kind of the same thing. If you have assuming the worst, what that leads to is it leads to low trust. Low trust then leads to insecurity. And insecurity leads to doubt, right? Now we start doubting ourselves. Is this really what I did? Should I do that? Shouldn't I do that? Doubt then leads to fear. And fear is what we just talked about. That's the enemy of that. So when you're in a relationship with someone with low trust, you're on pins and needles the whole time. You can be so careful and so cautious not to try to upset the apple cart that you might actually look suspicious to them, even if you're not doing anything wrong. So who we are is such a big deal. We always have to pay attention to who we are. But the key to this is we have to pay more attention to who we are than what they say or do. I'm going to say that again. In my marriage with Elaine, I have to be more concerned and more focused on who I am than what she says or what she does. And by that being that awareness part of it, that's going to help me make this choice between am I going to believe the best or am I going to assume the worst. So let's go back to 1 Corinthians 13, and I'm going to pick apart two of those verses. Verse 6 in chapter 13. And this is what verse 6 in chapter 13 says. Love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices in the truth. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. Okay, what is that saying? Love is not trying to catch the other person doing something wrong. Okay? Love does not say, I'm waiting for you to screw up so then I can jump on that. Okay? Love isn't building a case against the other person. We talked about this last week where we said, don't keep that scorecard of like all these things that they've done wrong so I can go back to that and I can pull that out in that situation and pull that fight out as well. We're not keeping score of the past. Love doesn't keep score. Okay? We're not in a competition. If we're in a competition, we're in what I like to call a submission competition, where I can out-love and out-submit to my wife, because that's what we're trying to do. Then we go to verse 7. This is what we talked about before. Always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love always protects. It protects from suspicion. It protects. It protects from saying negative things. If I speak negatively about Elaine and she's not in the room, I'm not protecting her. I'm exposing her. Now, maybe I'm right. Maybe she did something that wasn't okay. But if I go and I take that to other people and say that about her, I'm not protecting her. Love always protects. That's why God hates gossip. And gossiping against our spouse is probably one of the worst sins you could do, because, like I said, we're all sinful, broken people. We all have times in our lives where we fail. Okay, we need to always be aware of that. Trust means that part right there where we always believe the best. I'm going to come up with the most generous explanation to use Buckingham's term, and I'm actually going to believe the explanation that says, love always hopes. Always hopes. I'm not going to go negative. Okay, I'm going to stay positive, even though in my mind I might think something or I might feel something. I'm always going to approach the situation where I'm going to start off with always believing the best and always hoping. And the last one is always perseveres. Okay? What that means to me is that there will always be doubt. There will always be problems. There's always going to be issues. There's always going to be resistance, because, again, sin has come into this world, and it affects our marriages. It affects all of our relationships. So sin is definitely something that creates struggle in a marriage. You're going to have trouble. But again, when I'm faced with the trouble, when I'm faced with that decision, which one am I going to do? Am I going to believe the best, or am I going to assume the worst? Because every time you have a choice whether to make that. So, let me ask you a question. In your marriage, in your relationships, which one do you do? When there's a gap between what we expect going to happen and what are we going to experience? What's our first gut response? Is it to believe the best? Or is it to assume the worst? So I would say this is an easy thing to think about, but it's necessarily easy to live out. So here's the alternative. Like, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? If I choose to be over here, what's going to happen with that? Well, you could, what's the alternative? You could delight in uncovering mistakes, thrive on speculation, assume the worst, and embrace doubt. That's kind of your roll call if you're not going to do that. And that doesn't sound like a marriage I want to be a part of. That doesn't sound like a marriage that I want to be in or a relationship. And again, that's not what we want for ourselves. Of course, we don't want for our spouses. But we look at that list, I can guarantee you that most divorces probably come through one of those 4 ways. Probably a lot of those things, maybe all 4 of those things. That's the mindset of as soon as we jump to assume the worst. Now, one last thing I want to say about this too. Well, I'll mention this too. Basically, it's like what you're saying is, let's lay a trap, wait until eventually they'll step into it, and then you can just say, ha, I gotcha. That's not how to be a marriage. That's not how to be married. Last thing I'm going to say about this. We always need to be focused on how can I get better? What can I do? Okay. So when we have that gap, we're going to choose to believe the best, and we're going to make that better. Here's what I'll say: as a spouse, as a partner, if your spouse has an expectation that's right here, this is what I'm going to challenge you with. Not only just believe the best, but because I can't control what Elaine does. I can't control what she does. She's going to make choices. She's going to do things. And again, she's going to do the best she can, but in a sinful, broken world, she's going to fall. This is what I'm going to say. Her expectation of me, if her expectation of me is here, here's what I want to do. Here's my goal as a spouse. I want to exceed her expectation of me. I want to try, if she thinks, this is a good level for Jeff. If Jeff can do this, I'm going to be okay. If I can take that and I can try to outdo her own expectation, think about that. Think about a marriage that looks like that. Think about a marriage that says, I'm not only going to believe the best in her, and when there's a gap in there, I'm always going to fault on believing the best. Not only am I going to do that, whatever her expectation is of me, I'm going to try to exceed that. I'm going to try to blow that out of the water. Can you imagine what kind of relationship that would be in our lives? And this is like I said, we talked about this in marriage. This applies. You can apply this to your kids. You can apply this to your spouse or your job. You can apply this to lots of different relationships that we're in. Is always making that choice to believe the best. So this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to give you a homework assignment. Okay? If you are still kind of struggling with this and don't really quite get it or not quite sure, this is your homework assignment that I want you to do. I want you to try this for a week. Okay? Even if you don't believe it, even if you're not sure of it, even if you think, I'm not sure about this, just whenever that happens, go ahead and believe the best. I don't care if it's the 600th time that this has happened. Believe the best. Sit down, have the conversation, talk about it, and then as soon as it's over, you get right back to it. Just trying to believe the best. Because our behavior is drawn to trust. Okay? What I mean by that is we want to be with people, we want to be around people who trust us and who have a trust in us, who have a faith in us. One of the main reasons why I'm standing here, actually, I'll go out on a limb here and I'll say probably the reason why I'm standing here today is, number one, by the grace of God. But number two is I'm sitting in a room one day and I had someone who I care very deeply about, who I respect utmostly, look at me and say, Jeff, I think you can plant a church someday. And I went, you sure about that? And I wasn't sure. But he has a trust in me and a belief in me. And because of that, what it means to me and what it means to me, I believe in myself then, and I can have those things. And when we have tough times or there's struggles, I go, okay, but I know I can do this because I believe in that. So, man, what that does to our marriages, what that does to our relationships is such a key thing. And we are drawn to trust. We want to have people in our lives that trust us, and that's how it starts. It starts with a decision. When there's a gap, because there's going to be a gap, we choose to believe the best. So